Goodness.
Yeah.
You're the man everybody comes to for everything.
It's next Monday.
Yeah. Okay, so we have for roll Ken Evans. We have Crystal Slaughter. We have Susan Bragger, Jennifer Kaiser. We have George Thal.
Yes, ma'am.
Cecil Fielder. Lisa Levy. We have Jerry Merritt. Brittany Brown. Lori Cauldron. Michael Yoder. David Drybellis.
Yep, I'm here.
And Dr. Tiffany Tyler Garner. And then we have Derek Gibson.
Present.
You should have the others. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. Heatherly Thompson Hilbert. I'm here. Great. Thank you. I was like, I knew we had a quorum. Okay, great. So Katie Gilbertson, Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation for the record. I hereby affirm that this April 26, 2023 Governor's Workforce Development Board Barriers and Underserved Population Subcommittee has reached a quorum. And I further affirm that the agenda and notice for this meeting were properly posted pursuant to Nevada's open meeting law, NRS 241-02. Thank you.
You want to close my door? Disturbing you?
I'm gonna lay down a little bit.
Okay, good.
Seeing none, any public comments on telephone? Seeing none, any public comments on Zoom? Okay, moving on to agenda.
I don't know about the other people on Zoom, but the sound quality is very poor. It sounds like a network issue the way it's chopping up, and maybe microphone placement, but I can't hear anything.
I'm with you, Dave.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. It's so funny, right? We've been doing the Zoom thing for 3 years, but we're still figuring it out. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear that. I can hear that whole sentence very, very clearly. Yep.
Fantastic. Okay. Let's just. Sorry about that. Okay. Moving on to agenda item number 5, I'm going to start over. For possible action, is there any discussion before I call for a motion to approve the January 25th, 2023 Barriers and Underserved Populations Subcommittee meeting minutes? Okay, hearing no further discussion, I call for a motion to approve the January 25th, 2023 Barriers and Underserved Populations Subcommittee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion? Thank you. Do I have a second?
Dave Drivel, this for the record, second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Please let the record reflect that the motion carries. Moving on to agenda item number 6 for possible action, election of vice chair for the Barriers and Underserved Population Subcommittee. Do we have a nomination for vice chair for the Barriers and Underserved Population Subcommittee? You can either nominate yourself or a member of the subcommittee. If I may, I'd like to nominate Dr. Tiffany Tyler Garner for vice chair of the subcommittee. Okay, hearing no further discussion, I call for a motion to elect Dr. Tiffany Tyler Garner as the vice chair of the Barriers and Underserved Population Subcommittee. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Evelyn Thompson.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, please let the record reflect that the motion carries. Congratulations, Dr. Tiffany Tyler Garner, and thank you very much.
Each of you for the opportunity to serve.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Awesome. Moving on to agenda item number 7 for discussion and information only. I'd like to recognize Dieter's chief economist, David Schmidt, to present economic data that takes a deeper dive into the priority populations that were identified at the January 25th meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for the record. My name is David Schmidt. Repeating what was just said, I'm the chief economist for Dieter's Research and Analysis Bureau. Can I get a thumbs up from someone on Zoom just to make sure I'm talking loud enough? I'll try to make sure we're talking towards the mic. There's a bit of echo in here. And as Executive Director Lund mentioned, I'm here today to talk about some of the specific groups that we talked about in the past. If we can go ahead to the next slide. Just for some background and context, this is probably familiar to the members of the subcommittee, but several sessions ago, there was an update made to Nevada's statute, which requires the Workforce Investment Board to have applicable agencies that provide workforce services to coordinate efforts and resources in order to reduce the rate of unemployment for specific demographic groups. We prepare a report pursuant to this statute that highlights where there are populations that have an unemployment rate that's at least double the rate of unemployment for the county as a whole, where the unemployment rate is 4 percentage points higher, or the unemployment rate per group has been higher for 3 consecutive years than the county as a whole. And we use data from the Census Bureau's American Community Survey to do this. Generally, we're talking about 5-year averages because that is the information that's published. When I last spoke, I presented a few charts that compared additional data. So not just unemployment, but trying to take a broader picture of the engagement of different groups with the labor force. And that was specifically looking at groups that had higher or lower unemployment relative to the county and higher or lower labor force participation. Labor force participation is the share of the population that is either employed or unemployed. So they're either working or looking for work. The flip side of that would be people who are not in the labor force. And this is as a share of the civilian, non-institutional population age 16 or over. And I go through a lot of these definitions just to make sure there's lots of different ways that we could look at this. There's lots of different information. And so trying to make sure that it's clear sort of what's being highlighted. Following that chart, it's kind of helpful for me to think about both participation and the unemployment rate, because in some cases you have groups like individuals with disabilities. This is a group that does tend to have high rates of unemployment. They also tend to have very low rates of labor force participation. And so the challenge for how do you engage someone like that in work is not just, taking someone who's looking for work and helping them to get attached to a job, but it might be enabling them to search for work in the first place and overcome some barriers at a different point. And so by looking at more than just the unemployment rate, we can get a better picture of what's going on. The flip side of this might be someone who's like 20 to 24 years old. People that are younger tend to have much higher rates of labor force participation. They're more actively engaged, they're looking for work, but they have very high unemployment because they're also transitioning a lot more. They're early in their career, they're trying to settle into something. They might just be working some jobs on the side while they figure out what it is that they're going to do with their life. And so how you target someone to try to increase their attachment to the workforce and their success in finding employment sort of matters in these different dimensions. And so after the conversation with those charts, we identified a few specific groups to look at, in particular, young Black males in Southern Nevada, women with children and potentially also single parents, and individuals with disabilities. Because these are groups that there are clear cross-area impacts on the labor force. We also talked about the Hispanic population in Northern Nevada, which is a little bit different because this is a group that tends to have higher rates of participation and lower rates of unemployment. It's a bit distinct from some of the other groups, but I don't have the data for that group here today, mostly due to lack of time. But the good news is in the time since the last meeting, we've also been working with more data, and we've been looking at ways to go beyond what data is produced by the Census Bureau and published in its official tables. They also release microdata, which is harder to work with. It's not like I can go to the website and click on the button and see the numbers, but we've been working on pulling that data together and then creating some different aggregates of data, because using the Census Bureau data, we could look at the youth population. We can look by age, or we can look by race, or we can look by education. But using the microdata, what you can actually do is then combine those elements. So you could look at, what is the educational attainment of younger Black males? And so you can take multiple different factors, pull it all together, and then try to do some additional analysis there. And so the charts that are going to come, there's a lot of them, and I'll try to sort of walk you through what we're pulling together there, but I think we'll also help highlight some of the more specific details beyond just the individual data points that we've talked about in the past. And so with that, I'd like to start by talking about the young Black male population. So this first chart is not male or female. This is all individuals. Where you see blanks on the chart, this is where the data just isn't statistically reliable enough to use a number. And I would also say if there's small differences, I wouldn't put too much emphasis on that. This is broad landscape sort of thing. And so the difference between 5, 6, and 7, the statistical reliability of that difference is pretty low. But as you can see, if you're looking at the younger Black or African American population in the state, there is a much higher unemployment rate. You're talking 23% compared to, for other youth, rates of 10 to 13%. This is also persistent across different age groups. The Black population has higher rates of unemployment across the different age groups that are here. Here I'm focusing on the population that's 16 to 64, sort of your main working years with a little bit of buffer at the edges. The 4 categories going across here are youth, people 16 to 24. Early prime, the prime age labor force is usually talked about as people who are 25 to 55. And so I sliced that in half. You have early prime, which is 25 to 39, late prime, which is 40 to 54, and then the older population, which would be 55 to 64. So as you're looking across the numbers, you can sort of see what happens as people get older. And really, it's the Black population here that stands out. And if we go to the next slide, we can slice this one step further, and you have the same chart, but now we have men on the left and women on the right, males and females. And you can see that there is a higher rate of unemployment for Black females in their prime working years, in that 25 to 55 group, compared to Black males, 12 to 14% compared to 14 to 18%. But where the numbers get the most dramatic are the extreme age groups for the Black population, where you have 29% unemployment for young Black males, which was the group specifically identified here. So even in 2021, this is single year average. This is not the recession. This is not 2020. This is a year later. Rates are still a little bit high for the population as a whole. We're talking about the average over the course of the entire year of 2021, January through December. So this is still somewhat impacted by the pandemic. But for context, the state as a whole, our unemployment rate in April of 2020 was 30.4%. And so for the average for 2021 for young Black males, you can see is almost that high, even a year later as we're coming out of the pandemic. And it's significantly higher, more than double what other comparably aged groups are. For people who report having 2 or more races, the unemployment rate is 13%. For people who are white alone, the unemployment rate is 13%. I'll also note that you do have more gaps in the data here, because the more narrowly we tried to drill down, the more unreliable the data gets. And so in any of this analysis, there is a bit of balance between trying to be really specific, but having enough people in the sample that you're not just having one person's experience speak for everybody in the state. We can go on to the next slide and look at some other dimensions here. Here we have the same 4 age groups in the 4 sets of columns across the top and kind of the gray there: youth, early prime, late prime, and older. On top, we have the Black population. On bottom, we have all of the races put together. And here we're looking at labor force engagement. So in red, we have people who are in the civilian workforce. They are employed and they were at work in the week that the survey relates to. In green, we're talking about the number of people who were unemployed. In blue, we have the number of people who are not in the labor force. The size of the bar talks about how many people there are, and then the numbers show the percents. And what I was really wanting to look at here is say, across different age groups, especially if you look at the left-hand side of this chart, you can see that the number of people not in the labor force, the share of people not in the labor force, and the number of people who are unemployed is also higher. So again, we're not just talking about the rates of unemployment, but also the rates of people who are not in the labor force being somewhat higher. If you look at youth between the Black population, that rate of people who are not in the labor force is 40.2%. It's 38% for all other races. So it's a little bit higher, but a pretty close amount. If you look at unemployed, it's 13.6 to 7.4%. So it's getting close to double. And if you look at the number of people who are employed and working, it's about 10 percentage points less, 44% to 54%. And so the overall rate of engagement is lower for those people who are engaged in work search. Their success in finding employment is lower. And you can see, we know that's true because we just saw the unemployment rate being nearly 30%. And so that also is persistent as you go through. If I look at the rate of non-participation for the early prime workforce, it's 21% for the Black population, it's 17% for all other races, 25% for that late prime workforce. Your sort of best career years is like 40 to 55, 25% not in the labor force compared to 17% not in the labor force. And so what starts when people are younger is then persisting through their careers, as we would expect. The longer it takes to find that career to settle in, the more the implications carry through until we get to the older 55 plus. You have 46% not in the labor force to 37% for everybody else.
Contextualize what you shared, particularly that 29%. Isn't that tantamount or about equal to what the rate was during the Great Depression?
So that's correct. And just to echo the question, the 29% unemployment rate, if you think back to the US as a whole, I might get the year wrong here, plus or minus a couple of years, but roughly 1930. The national unemployment rate was about 30%, roughly at the height of the Great Depression. And so when I have to caveat this and say it was measured differently and it's not exactly comparable, but from a rough, get a handle on what this number means, that's how high the unemployment rate is for the young Black population. And to a lesser extent, the older Black population as well, as people are getting up into the 55 plus category there. And so that is definitely a very high rate of unemployment. You'll see that as we go through a couple more of the slides here. This is looking at labor force engagement and the share of individuals. If we look at the next chart, I get to make the font even smaller and add even more columns. Yes. We go to the next slide. Okay, that's what I was looking for. So this same columns, youth, early prime, late prime, older. Same categories on top and bottom. On top is Black, on bottom is all of the races. Here we're looking at educational attainment. And so the different color columns from left to right are less than a high school degree, high school or GED in yellowish, some college, but no degree listed in green, an associate's degree right in the middle with that teal, bachelor's degree, kind of the purplish blue, and then pink is a graduate or other professional degree. And where you see the biggest difference here is, again, looking at the youth population. If you take those first two columns and add up the totals, you get about 75% of the young Black population having either less than a high school degree or a high school or GED, so high school GED or less. For all of the races put together, if you add up those numbers, you get roughly 65, 66%. So there's about a 10 percentage point higher concentration at the lowest end of the educational spectrum here compared to all other races. And this is using the ACS original, like they ask a number of questions to identify, and this is specifically looking at people who identify as Black or African American alone for the purpose of the ACS. As you move through the age columns here, people do get educated. You know, the age 16 to 24, it's pretty unlikely that you have a lot of people that are getting a graduate or professional degree here. Like, there's a reason that those numbers are 0 point something percent, and the sample is so small, it's not very meaningful. As you move through, people do get educated as they get older, but these differences, again, kind of persist as you move through. By the time you get to the later years, you have lower rates of associate's degrees, lower rates of bachelor's degrees, lower rates of graduate and professional degrees for the Black population compared to other people. And so the same sort of thing, like that, you know, challenges attaching to the labor market early on persist into challenges attaching to the labor market later. Delayed start to education also leads to lower outcomes when it comes to education moving across through the charts here. And what I want to talk about here is also, if we move to the next chart, and I'm sure we can make all of these printed materials available because once you try to add 5 different categories on a chart, it just gets really small really fast. But we have the same information. I've done a couple of different things here. First, the scale on the top chart I will highlight does change. And so the number of individuals is relative to the highest number within that row. So this isn't saying we have 100,000 in both categories. It sort of scales, so you can see the difference. But here, we also have the average or the median personal income for those individuals in each of these groups. And so even for people who have comparable education, it's pretty similar in the youth category because most people are still starting their careers. But even if you get to the early prime, that 25 to 39 age group, if you look at people who have a less than a high school degree, for the Black population, that median income is $3,200. For the all of the races, it's $21,900. That's one of the more extreme differences. But for people who have a high school diploma or GED, for the Black population, it's $20,000. For everyone else, it's $29,000. For people who have a bachelor's degree, for the Black population, the average income is $38,000. For all other groups, it's $45,000. And so even for people who are comparable in terms of their educational attainment, in part because There's slightly lower labor force attachment and higher rates of unemployment. The average income then for these individuals is lower. And so less education translates into less income, translates into fewer opportunities. And I had been afraid that I would run out of things to say and I would, be here for only 5 minutes, and I'm afraid that I'm going to go the other direction. So I'll try not to belabor this too much, but just reemphasizing this point that there is higher non-participation, higher unemployment, in many cases, some comparable education, but just those small differences that are adding up as you look across these different dimensions. The last chart that I wanted to share for this group, this is looking at outcomes from the workforce system. This is using data from third quarter of 2021, and so we're in kind of the same ballpark. If you've been in the broader workforce board meetings when I shared the dashboard that we've been working on, this comes from that. And this is using some of the filters in that to look at median wages in the 4 quarters following exit from WIOA program. In this case, I'm looking at people who are in the youth programs, that their records are flagged as being a youth participant. They may have received other services, so this is not an exclusive look. But as you drill down, I think you'll see a pretty clear trend. So if you look at all youth in the Southern Workforce Board area, those median earnings do increase in the 4 quarters following participation. They're not very high for the youth programs in general. There's not as much earnings after people exit the program. There's more training, more building, but it's not the case that we're seeing people exiting and earning on average, very high income. So even the largest number here, $1,300, $1,400 a quarter, that's about $100 a week. But as you drill down toward the population that we're trying to target and talk about here, if you say, instead of all youth in the South, you say all male youth in the South, you cut that number roughly in half. In the 4th quarter following exit, now we're talking about $860 in wages a quarter, which is a little bit more, but not much more than $50 a week.
Okay, so just on there's for the record, just understanding correct. You're saying that that 1350 number is over the course of 3 months.
Yes. And so this is the median. So this is the middle number. So if we take all of the participants, and so for all youth participants, we're looking at about 2,600 records. And so this is picking the middle number for their earnings. And so some people are earning more, some people are earning less. If someone's earning $500,000 a quarter, that's not going to affect this average at all. This is just the earnings of the person that's in the middle. Which...
And their example for the record, the source of this data is
yeah, this is part of a federal performance report, which goes and matches individuals who participated in programs to wage data that's then collected by DETR and through other sources to look at total wages following the quarter in which they exit the program. So you completed your training, you left, and then there's just a match that follows up quarter after quarter to say, for everyone that participated, where all did they work, how much did they earn, pull that all together, and that comes out into this.
For the record, this is the by way of
yeah.
By way of the state plan, this is the report that and we get the report that we get at the board governor's report.
This is part of the details in the background. This is coming from the raw file itself and pulling those records out and then working with them. Yep. And then to highlight, what you can see up on the page in front of you, if you go from all male youth in the South to all Black male youth in the South, the same trend continues, cut that number in half again, and we're talking $457 a quarter. What was interesting to me is I was curious if this was reflected in higher or lower rates of penetration. Like, of those people who are unemployed, how many people are we reaching? Are we reaching a lot? Are we reaching a few? If you look at the number of participants for Black youth who are unemployed, or the number of participants for Black youth, and you look at the estimated unemployment for Black youth, and then you look at participants for everybody, and you look at youth unemployment for everybody. For everyone put together, there were 1,957 participants in this youth category. Total unemployment was about 26,000, and so the penetration rate was about 7.3%. Roughly 7% of the estimated number of unemployed people showed up as a participant in the WIOA file. For the Black youth, there were 782 participants, unemployed population of about 4,500. That penetration rate was actually 17%. And so we're reaching more than twice as many individuals. But to what degree is that participation showing up in maybe completing program services or translating into successful outcomes? As I was looking at this data, was one of the things that that I would highlight. And then the early differences translating later in terms of education as well as unemployment and participation. So that was group one. I will say, if I really go way past my time, I can come back and talk about it later. Feel free to
I think you're good.
Give me the kill sign. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to group number two, we were looking at outcomes for women with children and or single parents. And so this is kind of a blended topic. And so here I was starting with, let's talk about women's experiences in the labor force in general, and then kind of drill in a little bit deeper. Here on top, we have, again, from the ACS data, the male population. On the bottom, we have female population. On the height of the bars say how many people are there. And then here we're diving straight into educational attainment. And this may be a familiar story, but especially as you look, men versus women, once you get to some college, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, graduate or professional degree, women in general in Nevada have higher levels of educational attainment than men. Men have higher concentrations in the high school or less. Women have higher levels of education overall. But if we go to the next slide, you might wonder if this translates through into what the median income is for men versus women, and it does not. Again, if you look across educational levels, every single area, women earn less than men. I don't think I'm the first person to say this. It's not a novel thing, but it is definitely persistent, and it's pretty large across every different category here of educational attainment. If we can go to the next slide. Men at the top, women at the bottom. So if we go to the next slide, this again starts to get down into some of the micro data, and it's hard, even the fonts that looked big don't look big on this particular screen, but in each of these boxes, within the box on the far left, you have individuals who in the ACS, they don't have any data about the presence of children. For whatever reason, the ACS collects information about women who have their own children under 18 present in the household. And so on the far left, the data point is empty. So this could be men. It could also be women who live in group quarters population or are under, I think, 16 years old is the cutoff before which they don't report any information. On the far right, you have women who report having no own children. So there might be children in the household, but they might not be theirs. There might be children in the household, but they might be over 17 years old. But they don't have their own children under 17. The two main categories of age that are captured and reported on are children who are under 6 years old and 6 to 17. And so there's three buckets in the middle. There is, I'm going to read from my own notes here. Second from the left is female with children under 6 years old only. So this is only preschool age children in the household. In the center, you have females with own children 6 to 17 years old. So this is your school age column. And then the second from the right would be women with own children, both preschool and school age in the household. So by splitting up 3 different buckets with numbers of children, you can see that the columns are relatively small. And so it kind of helps to kind of push the numbers together, but I spread them out here to show really what those different buckets look like. So if you're talking about individuals who have preschool age children in the household, you want to look at the second from the left and the second from the right column. The center one is only school age children in the house. And so with that being said, the categories across the bottom here are different numbers of children in the household. Coming down, row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4 is those same 4 age buckets. And so up at top, we have youth, 16 to 24. Second row, early prime, 25 to 39. Third row, 40 to 55. Bottom row, 55 to 64. Across the different columns of charts that we have that civilian, employed, at work. So these are people who are at work the week before the survey. In the middle, we have unemployed. On the far right, we have people who are not in the labor force. And with all of that, the trends that you can see in these, go ahead.
What's the column again?
So the age is the 4 different rows, youngest at the top, oldest at the bottom. The individual chart, like the boxes of charts, the 3 columns are employed on the far left, unemployed in the middle, not in the labor force on the far right. And then within the charts, at the far left, you have men or women who don't qualify to answer the question for some reason. At the far right, you have women who have no children under 18 in the house, none of their own children, I should say. And then the 3 center columns are different slices of women with children of different ages. Preschool age, the leftmost of the 3 middle columns, school age only, center, both the right of those 3. And so if you compare the left set of charts to the right set of charts, you can see the difference in people who are working versus people who are not in the labor force. And this is one of the larger groups. The total number of people who are unemployed is pretty low because the number of people unemployed tends to be lower, but the proportions are kind of interesting because especially for the middle 2 groups, the 25 to 39 and 40 to 54, you can see that there's very high levels of people who are working, and then a lower number of women who are not in the labor force, or rather women who are working. But if you add up the numbers, for example, the employed columns, the far left column, second row, 53% of everyone who's working is a man. The other 47% would be women of some sort. And so there's roughly a balance in this people who are working. So even for women with children, there's a pretty high number of people who are at work, and there's more equilibrium. But if you go to the far right, for people who are not in the labor force, here you have 39% of men, 61% of women. And so within this, who is it that's not participating? 3 out of 5 of them are women, and the bulk of those are women who don't have children. So it's not that women with children don't participate, but they are much more likely to not participate, if that makes sense. So the blend of people who are working is kind of balanced. The blend of people who are not working, not looking for work is much more different. And that's, to not belabor the point too much, that's where you see the biggest impact of having children. It's not necessarily in showing up in unemployment as much, but it's much more likely to show up in whether or not someone even starts to look for work.
Can I ask you a question before you move on?
Yeah.
And it's probably there, and I'm just not able to quite get it. Can you dice that now from the age of the children and what impact that has?
Yeah, so there is a bit of impact. If you look at and I think this is one of those things that shows up a little bit better when it's not so spread out. But looking at the like unemployment rate and participation rate charts, one of the most clear things is that for people with children who are under 6, so preschool age children, whether there or not there were school age children in the household, there were lower rates of participation for people who had preschool age children. And you can kind of see that in the biggest chart here. So if we look at the number of people who are employed and this is going to be talking about women. If we look at the green chart on the far left, you have men on the left, preschool, school age, preschool and school age, and there are the center 3. And you can see that the number of people, the number of women who are working and have school age children is a bit higher, and it's about 9% of the total. For people who have either preschool alone or preschool and school age, the concentration falls to about 6% in either case. And so there's lower numbers of people working, lower numbers of women working when they have preschool age children. On the flip side, if we look over at the far right, the levels of people who are not participating are the highest for women who have both preschool and school age children, in part because there's probably more scheduling and things that are conflicting with someone's ability to either look for work or accept employment.
Evelyn Thompson-Hilbert for the record. So is the same approach to participation for the women as the previous demographics? When you said participation, is it that they're participating in some sort of a workforce program, and then the participation is gauged by whether they seek unemployment or not, or is it strictly self-reporting?
So in this case, David Schmidt again for the record, I should practice doing that. So in this case, when I talk about participation, I'm using the are you a labor force participant? So are you either employed or are you actively looking for work? Not registered for a particular program, to use a different way of describing it, because this is just top level collected from the Census Bureau, calling up people in a survey and then using that to build an estimate for the population. The next slide, again, it's the same layout in the charts, but now the numbers, instead of showing the share of the total that's in each column, again, show that median income. And really the point I wanted to make here is to focus on the left side. People do still have income, even when they're unemployed or not in the labor force, because total personal income from the census could also include things like interest income or public assistance income or retirements, dividends, all sorts of, they have like 7 different categories of income. So the numbers aren't always 0, though they tend to be close to 0 for people who are not working. But what was interesting to me is as you look through the groups of people who are employed, the far left set of charts, and the middle 2 rows where you're looking at your prime age workforce, one thing I did not find that I kind of thought that I would was my guess going in was that women who have children, because they might have reduced hours or might have to accept different sorts of, oh, thank you, different sorts of, or different levels of employment, I thought they would potentially earn less. That's actually not true. As you look at the average income across demographics here, for example, in the green charts, leftmost column, second row, you have the NA, which is mostly men, average income $42,700.
To use the pointer so we can.
Yes. I was just thinking it would be good for clicking, but it's good for even more.
Yeah.
Except it doesn't show up on the television, sadly, it looks like. But if you look at always hard to go, that one right there. Thank you, Caitlin. So that chart, for men, you have $42,700 in median income. Women with preschool age children, $40,000. Women with school age children, $38,000. Women with both preschool and school age, $35,000. Women with no children, $40,000. For the most part, numbers that are pretty consistent. If you go down a row to the blue chart right below that, For men in general, you have 55,000. School-age children, women, 39,000. School-age children, 41,000. Both preschool and school-age, 40,000. No children, 41,000. And so it's interesting to me that the presence of children, as far as I could tell from slicing it this particular way, didn't change women's income compared to women with no children. And so this doesn't seem like it's the presence or non-presence of children that's having a particular impact on wages. It's more of a men versus women kind of effect, and that women, whether or not they have children, are seeing similar effects in their earnings. One more chart. And yeah, next slide, please. Sorry, clicker didn't work here. There's not much here, so I'm going to move on pretty quickly from it. But if you're looking at the materials later, this is the number of hours. And so this is maybe an example of another way we can slice and dice the data. How many hours on average are people working during a week during the course of the whole year? Similar sorts of trends. There are some slight differences here, but it's not very big. But for those two charts on the leftmost column, for men, it's about 42 hours. For most women, it ranges from 36 to 39. There are some slightly lower hours potentially for especially younger workers, for women who had preschool age kids, but it's kind of within the margin of error for the sample here. And so I don't know that there is a statistically significant difference among the different categories of women in the total number of hours being worked for those people who are working on average during the week. There are some larger differences for people who are unemployed or not in the labor force. You might think it's weird that there is an average number of hours being worked for people who are not in the labor force, but I just say people's lives are complicated, and this is an average over the course of the whole year. And so someone at the time that they're surveyed, maybe they weren't in the labor force, but they have been in and out. You know, they worked a job for a few months when they could swing things and it couldn't happen, or they have been looking for a better opportunity, or you can write 1,000 stories on how people's individual circumstances might be informing that, but there is data on average number of hours being worked for people who at the time of the survey were not necessarily in the labor force. On the next slide, we have the same sort of approach looking at participants. In this case, trying to drill down to the specific group of women with children and single parents. If you look at single parents, can be reported as both women and men in the raw data here. So again, in this case, I'm using 2 rows of data. So the top 3 light blue cells show the average quarterly earnings in the 3 quarters prior to program participation. I didn't show this for youth because it's pretty much always 0. But in this case, someone coming into an office as a single parent may have been working. So this might be someone who's looking to receive some training and move into something different. Or maybe they were working and they were laid off and they're looking to re-enter something else. But here you can have earnings both before and after participation. And for all participants, you can see that the numbers actually drop a little bit. They go from quarterly earnings of about between $2,300 and $2,800 a quarter to about $2,000. So this probably represents people who have lost a job, they participate in services, and they get attached to something else that still might not be what they were earning before. If we shift that to single parents, the story actually flips a little bit. Here you have people that were on average earning $1,600 to $1,900 per quarter. And then looking at 4 quarters after participation, median quarterly earnings is up to $2,600 a quarter. And then if you look at female single parents, that actually becomes a little bit wider. The average quarterly earnings before participation were a bit lower, and the earnings after program participation appear to be a bit higher. And so I think this is kind of a bit of a success story where as women who are coming into offices to receive services, who are single parents, are getting some training, they're actually seeing some good opportunity to increase their earning potential on average, and it's happening pretty consistently in each of the 4 quarters you can see here. First, second, third, fourth quarter after participation, each one of those quarters is higher than the highest average of any of the quarters before participation. So I think this is there's some successful outcomes from the training and programs that are here and available. The bigger challenges and the bigger questions are not necessarily in terms of earning potential, but more in participation and access, the sorts of supports that can help to enable someone to recognize those kinds of gains, not necessarily like, is there the opportunity, but it's how can we move you from that not participating to participating in employed kind of college.
Before we move on, do you have these broken down by race?
This could get broken down by race. It's just a clickable box. So if I had my computer plugged in, I would just say, here, I'll show you. But
if we can see that in the future, that would be great.
Yeah.
For the record. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And finally, the third group that I'll be talking about here today is people with disabilities. This is the group that, if you look at this on the chart, has the biggest impacts to their labor force participation, and also generally very high, much lower participation than the population as a whole, much higher unemployment than the population as a whole. Here on the top of the chart, we have individuals who have a disability. On the bottom row of the chart, we have people who do not have a disability. We have our 4 age groups, youth, early prime, late prime, and older, as we move left to right. And then within each chart, in red, we have employed, in green, we have unemployed, in blue, we have not in the labor force. If you look at the bottom row, for most people, in most age groups within this 16 to 64 age bracket, it's much more common for the number of people working to significantly outnumber the number of people who are not in the labor force or the number of people who are unemployed. For people with disabilities in that top row, the story is very different. In the youngest and oldest categories, people who are not in the labor force clearly outnumber the number of people who are working. In some cases, it's kind of 50-50 whether you're working or looking for work or not in the labor force, but especially as you move up toward the older groups here for individuals with disabilities, non-participation in the labor force becomes much, much more prevalent. If we go to the next chart, it gets really, really small. But here we have 6 different categories of types of disabilities that individuals might have. You have hearing and vision difficulties. You have cognitive difficulties, ambulatory difficulties, self-care difficulties, and independent living difficulties. And I think this is something you just have to see the printed version of the chart to try to grasp. But there are some groups and some different types of disabilities for which the numbers are a bit higher or lower. This chart is mostly to show, like, here all of the charts have the same total height. And so if you look at the boxes here, the size of the box kind of tells you how many people there are relative to each of the other groups on this entire chart. But because, especially as you get older, some of those numbers get really high, the next chart sort of equalizes it. So across each row, you can see the relative proportions. And so just sort of going top to bottom, the top chart, you have individuals with an ambulatory difficulty, top row. Second row is individuals with a cognitive difficulty or difficulty remembering. Third is individuals with a hearing difficulty. Fourth is individuals with a independent living difficulty. Fifth row is a self-care difficulty. And at the bottom, you have a vision difficulty. And so you can kind of see as you look across the different types of challenges that individuals are facing. For some of these, like vision or hearing, that's where we see a lot more people who are employed and employed more consistently through this. The flip side might be someone with a cognitive or an independent living sort of challenge. In this case, we tend to have higher rates of non-participation. I do think it's important to point out, in every type of challenge here, there are people that are successfully employed. There are people who are actively looking for work. And so I would not want to create a bucket and say, oh, you know, this type of challenge is too great. Like, people can do really amazing things. And even people with multiple challenges and multiple types are still out there employed and looking for work. And so I think it's important to highlight that, not just say, look at all the people who aren't participating, but depending on the level of challenges someone faces and the barriers that they have, as you're looking at how to help improve labor force attachment for people with disabilities, again, the type of difficulty that they have and the moving them from that not even looking for work into, you know, maybe believing that they can work and that there are tools and resources out there for them is probably a big part of this, because of where people tend to be concentrated in terms of not participating in the workforce. Yes, I think I have 2 more charts, almost done. Going back to the layout that we had at first, top row with a disability, bottom row without a disability. This is educational attainment. And again, there's people across the spectrum. People with disabilities are a little bit more concentrated in the some college or less, some college, high school, or less than high school. All tend to be a little bit higher. For people with an associate's degree, bachelor's degree, or graduate or professional degree, the concentration is a little bit lower. Even adjusting for that, if we go to the next and last slide, here we have again the median income. So what are people earning in each of these different groups? And there are some pretty significant differences across the board, with the one exception being less than a high school degree. In every other group, individuals with disabilities are earning on average a lower income, even for those people who have a graduate or professional degree. And I'm sorry, I just threw a whole bunch of numbers and statistics at you. I would say going forward, if there are other specific slices of information, like can we get information about this, and this, and like how many total people are there? I think we can do estimates of total number of individuals. We can do a little bit of geographic work. You know, there's lots of caveats with everything, but we've only really within the last couple of months started trying to dive harder into aggregating this micro data and trying to tease out some of the intersections of some of these measures, and not just look at them as individual categories, age or race or education, but see like what's the blend of these different factors look like in the state.
I do think should have from that. And talk to us and the data that was talk us a bit more right? Just the trends of the data among these specific populations.
David Schmidt again for the record. In a lot of cases, and because this is census level data and it tends to be annual averages, one of the things that I've noticed in looking at the data over time is a lot of these trends are pretty similar. The challenge in working with data from the Census Bureau like this is that it is still pretty high level. And so I sort of think of it as what does the landscape look like? What is going on in terms of the overall layout of the state? For things like program evaluation, or how are things changing day to day, having a higher frequency source of information is kind of helpful, because all of these numbers, they're the most current that I can get, and much more current than anything we've been able to do before. And it's still 2021 data. And so it's still sort of coming out of the pandemic. It's not saying what's happening here in, you know, spring of 2023. It's saying what was happening 2 years ago. But in the challenge with the monthly data is that the surveys are much smaller, and it's hard to, you know, say, you know, what's the unemployment rate for men versus women. It's hard to say what the unemployment rate is for the state, because that number will bounce around a whole lot.
More so, was that 29%?
Yep.
Was it 50?
That number, I could find that. We would have to go back to 2019 because 2020 was a mess. What I would expect to see is you probably have a similarly high ratio. It's probably higher in 21 than 2019 because it's coming out of the pandemic, and 2019 was pretty low. But I would not be shocked to see 15, 20% instead of 29%, but being similarly like, 2-3 times what the rate is for the population. So
I guess when you come back, at least living for the record, maybe for the next meeting, even if you could do it on like a temporal scale, even like pre-recession, post-recession, for the Great Recession, and then comparing that maybe every 2 years into pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic, that snapshot might be really interesting in terms of the trends.
Yeah.
So that's my first one. My second question there is, so I'm interested in that from the median earners perspective, right? And in part because it very much baffles me that we spend about $2,500 per person to train somebody, and over the course of 4 months they make $2,500. Might as well just give them the money, right? Like that's very valuable. So if we can come back and say, okay, based on data that was reported in 2021, median earnings, 2019 and 2018 are we still seeing the same outcomes? My gut tells me probably because we haven't changed.
Yep.
And just a quick question for Evelyn, for the record, it's just really quick. The all other races in the very first slide.
Yes.
Did that include Native Americans, or are we looking at that at all?
So David Schmidt, for the record, we can break that out in this case because my focus was trying to break out the young Black male population in particular. That was my single line, but we could look at, depending on sample size.
But they're reflected, sorry to interrupt, but they're reflected in the all others.
They would have been included in that.
Only because there was some questions at the board, and if they're all inclusive already, then that wouldn't impact still the really extraordinary high rates for young African American males anyways.
Yeah, and the data for the Native American population is, they're one of the groups with the highest and most consistent unemployment rates. If we were to break them out separately, I think in just about every county in which we have information for that population, it does tend to be higher. It's just that the numbers are somewhat smaller, but it is a population with its own unique challenges depending on the area that you look at. I do know that the Census Bureau, if you wanted to know more about that population, in addition to county level data, does also include information about various reservations and those geographic areas within the state. And so if you wanted to look at different tribal areas, you would be able to also have some estimates for that, as opposed to just saying, within Washoe County or Clark County, but if you wanted to look at, Walker River or, Pyramid Lake, they do have those kinds of breakouts available.
I would just say, Evelyn, I would just say for future, since it was brought up, just so that we have it and we know in inclusivity of the barriers committee, we have that data to look at.
Being for the record, the Native American Indian Commission for the state, actually, I think it's Serena who's running that right now. They have an education committee that the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation is starting to work with to strengthen that relationship. So that data actually would be really helpful. I'm sure they don't necessarily have that data right now too. So that would be great. Okay, David, thank you so much. I'm guessing that we could have questions for you for another 2 hours. You will definitely be back, I hope. And with that being said, as you leave this meeting, if you have additional questions or data points that you want to see in the future, please let us know, right? That's why he's here. And David is really great and easy to work with. So thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 8 for discussion information only. I'd like to recognize now the Vice Chair of the subcommittee, Dr. Tiffany Tyler Garner, with the City of Las Vegas's Department of Youth Development and Social Initiatives. Thank you so much again for hosting us for this meeting and also for presenting during the meeting. So, and also if you're able to stay for a few minutes after the meeting ends, I believe we have an opportunity to do a brief tour. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you for allowing us to host. We believe that the charge of this committee is important. And in reviewing some of the targets, believe that there may be some synergy and want to offer as an example of the opportunity, some work that's underway in this municipality. So I have this brief PowerPoint. I won't go through each slide, but there are a couple of key slides that I want to highlight. So if we could fast forward, where you see the commitment that we've made just even since 2019, nearly $60 million in capital investment. You could fast forward. Next slide. Next slide. Definitely deeply engaged in the community. Next slide. Next slide. Let's pause here. It's a completed project. It's important to note that there are a few key completed projects underway that you can visibly see today, as well as have some deep connections to the work that you're proposing to do. In the case of the Asset Network Phase 1, that was a project to bring connectivity to the community, particularly to ensure that you could go online during the pandemic. There is a Phase 2 underway where the whole focus is bringing connectivity around workforce development resources online. And so we are partnering with a couple of key partners, CSN, CTE from CCSD, as well as Adult Ed and others to see what kind of online content we can bring, not only to this community, but a community just south of here. So you know that's the Hera, near the stratosphere area of great need. That's part of the project area. And so definitely want to talk through how we might leverage the fact that we are like putting hotspots in places like the Public Housing Authority was part of Phase 1. To expand that include other areas of the community where we have found that the unemployment rate is disproportionately high. And so what might that look like if we were creating another level of access to ensure on-ramps to opportunity for communities that have great need? The other thing to note as a part of this discussion is the COPS Innovation Center, which is here on property. As you entered the parking lot, there was a structure to your right. That was a structure donated where now technology training is happening as a part of it. And so recent projects include training over 60 individuals in cybersecurity or drone training, even working with seniors to ensure that their digital literacy and other types of literacy increases a part of the work. So what are the opportunities there to maybe look at portable, stackable credentialing in this community that ensures a real pathway? And then the two other to note on these completed projects, and I'm highlighting completed as in already in place. So the question becomes how we leverage it, right? We're not waiting for it to happen, it's occurred. And so now there's an opportunity to ask ourselves, like, how do we optimize the fact that this investment has happened? So in the case of the next one, the Strong Start Mobile Pre-K, we literally have the ability to deploy pre-K sites throughout the community in areas of need that could be co-located in such a way that while children are participating in early education, if we talk about women with children, which we heard about today, their parents may be able to participate in some other workforce development activity. Are there key places or systems or entities that we can strategically partner with to deploy in such a manner that we undertake some kind of multi-generational or 2-gen approach management, right? And then lastly, on this slide, the Employee MV Career Hub could actually walk you over in a bit, show you where it is as a partnership with Workforce Connection, where we've established workforce development services on site, and are now looking at ways to expand that partnership to include things like TANF and SNAP eligibility or registration there, as well as business services. Next slide. And so this piece about projects underway. Within a 5-mile radius of this complex, in the next 24 to 36 months, there are major projects underway that have already received or the capital for it has been secured. So just adjacent to this parking lot here, as you drove in, you saw, or drove around the block, you saw 2 very large empty lots as you made a right onto the street. To the right, CSN will build a training center with investments in EDA in partnership with the city of Las Vegas. And to the left, we are building workforce housing that will include not only a certain percentage at 80% of the area median income, also market rate, but on the first floor of it, a market hall and business incubator. And so some of the opportunities are, if we have literally early childhood education, workforce housing and training, and then a workforce center within a block and a half of one another, how might we strategically work to braid services in such a way that we can ensure not only an on-ramp, but really some sustained engagement so that we can see that those wages go up quarterly, right? And so what are the possibilities there as we think about that two of the priorities here where we know that there's some overrepresentation in this community is the number of males 16 to 24 that have disproportionately high unemployment and have for, Dave, would you say over a decade, maybe even two? And so not a new phenomenon, but some new resources with the ability to better leverage a pathway just because they are in closer proximity to one another. And so you see the CSN Training Center, the West Side Education Training Center. I should also note that every successful project here, there is a replicate. I'm sorry, does someone have a question on the line? There is a replication underway in the East. And so that East Las Vegas area that also has a disproportionately high unemployment rate, we are in partnership to replicate another CSN campus. We are already doing the mobile pre-K. The second phase of that asset project includes that area. So it's workforce content, as well as, I believe there's one other piece, the Workforce Development Center and some housing proposed. And so in terms of historically, where has there been the greatest need, we are strategically partnering some of those areas where we've seen the greatest disproportionality over the last 2 decades. And we'd love to do this work in partnership with others. You'll also note on this list, I talked about that market hall and that small business incubator, which will be the first floor of that workforce housing. You'll also see that there is a museum proposed within a 5-mile radius, and that last month, they approved a new library, all within a 5-mile radius of this location. Next slide. So those are some of the projects. We can skip past that with their proposed timeline. Here is the lot that you passed, and the next slide is a rendering. And so it's also important to note that in preparation for the completion of this project, a few years ago, CSN began delivering training on campus here. So there are at least 4 classifications, including community health workers and other dialysis training and some other things already happening as a part of that process. Some workforce development assistance being provided. And we have committed to broadening what has historically been like youth workforce development to include adults. And that's why I signed on to come on board to partner with the city to help them expand their focus and deepen their resources around workforce development for the communities that they serve. Next slide. So you'll see that there are a number of things playing beyond the capital projects. They're even redoing the streets in this area, hence why you couldn't drive past a certain point on the street. Next slide. That includes looking at like broadband infrastructure and some of those things that have historically been barriers in this area. Next slide. Next slide. As a part of the tour today, you can check out this with an effort to capture the rich history of the community from its inception to where we are today. And we routinely lease out the share the space, lease it out for events and things of that nature. It's not very important. Next slide. Next slide, please. It's on there. It's important to note in the last 6 months, we've met to expand the workforce hub that we have here to include business services. We've also launched in January a small business development grant, particularly looking at businesses in this community to grow their capacity in hopes that they will have the capacity to hire from this community. And so we are currently working with approximately 84 businesses who have recently completed a series of workshops and trainings. We are also affording them not only business license support, but marketing material and TA. We've walked them through the contracting process, particularly with the city, as well as procurement and how it typically works at the state level. It's a part of building their capacity to be competitive. And so another complement is braiding not only workforce development, housing, and other services, but even looking at the economic development piece and working to grow businesses, including businesses on Jackson Street. We have found that there are a number of parcels that have been passed down generation to generation, that there are some existing owners who have parcels that we're strategically working with to establish businesses on those parcels. So they've just completed this training. Next slide, please. We talked about asset and phase 2 and what those investments will entail. I just want to make sure that I covered each piece of that for you before we move on to the next slide and talked about the workforce development, the array of online workforce development content where we have strategically looked at creating a continuum that begins in K-12, particularly a focus on leveraging CTE content, and then partner with Commission on Post-Secondary Education, the eligible training provider list to see how many of those individuals would be willing to host online workforce development content, as well as CSN and other partners. I should note it's just a part of James Gay Park, where we've recently introduced these containers as a part of a pathway to urban farming, that it is in development, particularly to address food insecurity in this community, but that we are also looking at training pathways so that it is a valuable sector that folks could also have an opportunity to be exposed to it. It will complement a grocery co-op in this community, as well as an expansion of a nearby grocery store, if you're familiar with Mario's. It's a part of that process. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is that farm, and we could walk a half or so a block just east of here and see it. Pause here for a second. About 3 blocks over from here, they're also establishing a healthcare clinic. And so not only will it address some health disparities in the community, we're also looking at how we leverage it to support not only health equity, but career pathways in the health field. If you could, next slide, I believe it's the rendering. And so if you can imagine a CSN campus, workforce housing, a block over from that, a health clinic, the urban gardens that are underway. There are not only a number of opportunities, but the face and landscape of this community is going to be transformed. And all of this is slated to happen within the next 24 to 36 months, with some of them already completed. Next slide, we talked about D Street properties. That's where we're working with folks to build on parcels, as well as doing existing infill projects to create more housing for individuals. Next slide, please. Talked about that market hall, the great visualization of it in the small business incubator. Next slide, please. Talked about the museum that is underway as a part of the project. Next slide, please. Some planning is underway. I think that might be all for this content, for this PowerPoint. With the limited time we have left, I want to draw your attention to a few other documents that I have provided that complement this discussion. One, I'd like to note this pamphlet that you have. It's called the 100 Plan in Action. It's important to note that on pages 3 and 4, You can see a number of the projects that I have alluded to, including things like the one-stop center, small business center support, and the market hall. Give you a minute to scan that. I also want to note page 5. And on page 5, you'll see a reference to the Marble Manor housing redevelopment. And I want to highlight that development as a part of the projects underway here and draw your attention to this packet. So the Marble Manor is public housing that will be redeveloped. They will double its capacity, and they have redone the area. But the thing I want to note for us, particularly as we think about some of the populations that we're targeting, if you look at this first page of it, you'll notice a focus on income and employment. Please see or note that the median income annually is $10,455. For Las Vegas, it's nearly 60,000, and for this area, it's only 24. And so it's, you think about what you heard about male employment or employment of women with children. I want you to think about this area possibly being an example of an epicenter for the challenge that we're attempting to address in this committee. And I want to ask us to consider what are the possibilities there. So we know that a municipality has made the investment of partnering with the community college to put a campus in the area, has created workforce development housing, ensured that folks that live in the area will be able to live comfortably and work in the area, that there is now a clinic. When you look at the challenges for finding and keeping work on this page, which is in the bottom corner, you'll see things like affordable childcare or having a disability. So another target for this group are individuals with special needs. What are the implications for our work? You'll see things like transportation and medical and health restrictions, where there's a clinic going up the street and in an area that doesn't have a pharmacy. They'll now have a pharmacy. How do we leverage these investments, or maybe even partner in ways to pilot some of the concepts that maybe you all have about, like, how do you really create an on-ramp, or what have been the barriers? How do we overcome them? So if we can take childcare off the table, transportation off the table, because you can literally walk to 3 places where you would normally get service. If we can ensure that we take health off the table, what else do we need to put on the table through partnership to see some of the change that we want to see in communities where the unemployment and underemployment is disproportionately high? I want to pause for a second and see if you have any thoughts about some of the things that you're seeing here.
What state, like this state is very specific. What's the source of the credit? Is it a city?
Contracted to actually have a study undertaken that included a canvassing of the community and a survey of the residents. I believe it's like there were over 2,000 respondents for parts of the survey. So it's significant.
And the reason I asked that question is, I think, I think, you know, when I think about barriers to the underserved population, I almost believe, and I ask myself the question is it from a lack of infrastructure and service? Like, is it from a lack of infrastructure and buildings and places, or is it more so from a place of the efficacy of the delivery strategy of the services that we have? Like, you know, and part of the reason why I asked that is, I mean, we have Marble Manor. We have this community here specifically. We know this is the median income of these people. We know there are people there. You know, however, from a services deployment standpoint, when we sit on the board, in terms of the outcomes that we're seeing, you know, we hear, oh, we're not reaching, but there's clearly a community here that needs the services, but they're not receiving. So, you know, I think as we think about solutions, that's, you know, it's the development will happen, but if I think what needs to be addressed is more so the delivery of the services and the accountability around the strategy and the efficacy of the delivery of the services. Where that needs to be addressed, because if not, we're going to move forward with these developments and repeat the exact same strategies, exact same service that we've been offering that haven't proven, we haven't quite seen the results that we should.
Dr. Tiffany Tyler, for the record, as someone who has been perplexed by a number of the challenges that we see, I would say not only is it some of those things, but several others. If I just consider the and I can tell you that there are ways in which as systems, when we come together, that we disincentivize participation. And so, for example, we will say, hey, I have this great opportunity. I'm going to pay for training for you, and you'll be able to you'll go from earning $200 a quarter to now earning $18 to $22 an hour. But if I know that the median cost of a studio apartment requires that I at least have $27, am I really giving them a pathway to opportunity? And that is actually the case in our community, where if we look at the top 10 jobs in our community, I don't even think it's 7. Is it 7? Not even 7 of them afford you what you would need to earn to maintain a 2-bedroom apartment in this community. Yet we know that we're training pathways are often entry-level pathways, right? We know that once they participate in it and their income increases, that they will lose some critical supports they use to maintain their lifestyle, like childcare or food assistance, or healthcare. So in some instances, we're saying, go on this great adventure with us. I'm going to ensure that you can earn $18 an hour, but I know that you probably need about 37 just to meet your needs after you leave these programs. So and there are efforts to overcome those challenges. Like I think the effort that happened where, I think it was a couple of years ago, where you committed to a year of childcare, folks would participate in an employment and training program as a part of the process. You've shared that with everyone, right? So you do that, you get through some portable or stackable credentialing for that year. And then you discover that the average cost of childcare in this state is about $12,000 to $14,000, which is in some instances more than college tuition. Have I really put you on an on-ramp to opportunity? Right. And so for us to I want to say to set it on any one set of shoulders without consideration for the ways in which we need to braid it to really see the change we want may be a little short-sighted. So I could give you, if I needed a culprit, I could point to any number of systems or people and just ask them to own their one piece. And even if they own their one piece for 12 months, we would not see the change that we wanted because we have not worked through what it is to be an ecosystem around these needs or issues.
Yeah, so Evelyn Thompson over for the record. This is the piece right here where I wanted to be on the committee. I know because a lot of my work, we've seen this over and over and over. And so I really think it's important that we address the underlying barriers, because we go to meeting and we have agency after agency. And just to echo what you're saying, yes, there's transportation. Yes, we know the big three. What is it? Transportation, childcare, and food insecurity or interchangeably those were the top 3. But I think what's most important for this committee, forgive me that I know Madam Chair is now the chair of this. I think these are the things we really need to be examining, because what is the real problem? I get the data, and the data really isn't unlike any other metropolitan area in the country, right? So here with what you're describing, how or what needs to happen to even augment the ability to earn money, because like Derek, to echo what Derek was saying, all of these look great, but we have seen it in city after city after city, right? I'm from the East Coast and live in LA. Yes, the projects and all of those are great, because essentially a public housing is still going to be looked at as a project. And how do we prevent this from being another project where people are just warehoused and not flourishing. So I just had to put that on the record because I think if we just do business as usual as a barriers committee, we're gonna miss the mark. So I'm so glad I loved your presentation, but I think the real nitty gritty is what you said. You know, I've worked with people for over a decade. How do I look you? I personally can't do it. If I can't get you to earn income for a living, and not just the living wage, it's now arguably going up to $15. But what do we need for these communities, for our communities to benefit economically, period? So I'll shut up. But I think it's really important what you just said.
Other thoughts or comments?
Dr. Tyler-Garner, what, please leaving for the record, what support do you need to make all of this happen, right? In terms of some of these community collaborative partnerships with the state, with nonprofit, with additional funding sources. What do you think that looks like, and how could this subcommittee help with that?
Dr. Tyler-Garner, for the record, I think there needs to be more ongoing coordination, communication, and decision-making. And as a part of that process, not only asset mapping where we look at where the assets are, but a gap analysis that ties the gaps to existing services with a commitment to growing the other ones that we need. It's a part of that process. And I also believe that part of it is regulatory and statutory. So there are some places in policy where we cannot work together in the way that we would hope to see the changes we wanted. Those are things that we can begin to target to take it off the book. So even any research or analysis that could be done to look at that strategically. I'll also note as a part of that process that I have not seen where we have figured out as systems what folks would need to do to see the thing that we say we are investing in or want. And if we're not clear about how it would work, I don't know why we would expect participants or consumers to be clear about it. As I think about other business models, they adapt. I'm not sure we as a system adapt. If I had to work this hard to get Starbucks, I wouldn't be buying it. And if I stopped buying Starbucks, they would stop selling it the way they do. They would adjust the menu. They would have someone out there like Chick-fil-A does, like I'm gonna be on this machine for you ever get to the window. I don't know if it's because we believe these things are public services that we don't have to do that. I'm like, I have seen instances and systems where we still expect folks to show up and read papers off a wall for a job board at a time when folks can have their groceries and their hygiene products delivered to their house. And then in the same breath, we'll say things like, oh, they just don't want it, or maybe they don't need it. And I'm like, if I have to choose between participating in this training and then know that I'm gonna be $3,000 short or something, at the end of it, I'm not sure it's safe for me and my children to shift in the ways that you're saying. And I'm not sure that we work through that as systems together. Does that make sense? Like, even if we just apply some of the basic principles that other businesses do to the way that we work together to deliver services, I think we might see some improvement. Like even something as outlandish as McDonald's now is saying that it's 100% beef in their patties. It's in response to declining sales and a shift in our culture. If they can shift because they are shifting in response to the culture of the folks that they are have as consumers, I'm not sure that why we don't shift to account for the ways in which generational change has necessitated something else, or even advances in technology. The pandemic forced us to do some things differently. I am uncertain about our ability to embrace a more client-centered system, and not because I believe you need to, not because I don't believe folks need to have skin in the game, but if I really want to see the outcomes I want or the ROI for some of the public investments in the making, I'm like, well, maybe a thing I could do is shift how I go about it in the system. Does that make sense?
That's literally it. It goes back to the question that I asked in our last board is, we sit in these meetings every other month. AI, I work in the digital innovation. That's where AI is accelerating breakneck pace, right? None of the agencies have showed up to the board and talked about what their technology strategy is. In technology, everything we do is very user-centered. Very, very user-centered. Is every strategy we make, it's because at the end of the user is what drives the bottom line for us. Thinking about in the public system, we've almost moved away from that. It's like it's almost treated as we're doing them a favor. No, we're in the public system. This is what we're supposed. It's our responsibility. The second thing is when we start to talk about technology, and I think we've almost just accepted that the government system has outdated systems, technologies, processes, and I think that's a cop-out, right? If we say that, oh, that's just how the system works. That's what you're supposed to. Well, when they go, that's not what they're. If your role, your responsibility is to reach these communities, and you're saying, oh, but you don't have the system to, you don't have the. You're abdicating yourself with the responsibility. And I think that's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what, just as a system, we're doing. And so that's kind of just my thoughts on that. I think what needs to happen as kind of the initial next step from this subcommittee is I think we need to conduct a study to really understand with these three populations, what do they actually want? How do they actually need to be reached, right? And not I fall within this young Black male. I'm not going to employ it. I'm employing and it's not happening. Like that's not where they are. I've recently in the past 2 months, I've started going to the library. You don't see any young Black males between the ages of 16 and 36 in the library. Most people, they're not in the library, but the immediate thought is, oh, there's a new partnership, we're putting another employee. And no, that's not what I shared this with I shared this at the last board meeting. Had a conversation with a partner of ours, NBA 2K, the game, right? Like say NBA 2K. On average, has 2 million daily users logging every single day. NBA 2K. The demographic of this 2 million users are 75 to 80% male, predominantly. And their age range between the ages of 16 to 36. They're not at the library. They can't be logged in and be at the library because the library doesn't have these resources. And that's essentially what we need to find is, one, we need to take a very user-centered approach, client-centered approach, find out what they're not going to take forklift training. They value flexibility. They're not interested in culinary training. They value flexibility. But we need to understand what employment resource, what trainings do they actually and take that to them versus the other way around.
So Evelyn, for the record, unless someone else has just really quickly to Derek's point, and I know a number of us, almost all of us in the room, one of the interesting experiences I have with workforce development specifically is that it's sector driven. And I know about over 10 years ago when Governor Sandoval put up, that's about where I start looking at this, set up the top performing sectors. To Derek's point, if we're looking at client centers, there is a misalignment when we're looking at sector-driven stuff. And so, I think that's another very important part to look at on the barriers committee, because this is something with working with whether it's the participants or the students or whatever, many a time I've been asked, why are these only available? Or worse yet, I'm going to keep it real in here, and I will say it on the record, that we're putting people in a manufacturing job because a lot of these programs have to be filled, or you have to satisfy a certain requirement dependent on the agency. So we may get the numbers to satisfy the grants to keep the manufacturing program, or to keep the culinary program, or whatever it is. And so someone has training, but they don't have the interest or commitment or conviction to go. Maybe they thought, some of the people I've talked to, maybe they thought they would get something out of the training that would lead to a job. But I really think back to Dr. Tyler's point, I think we need to look at, is the very method that we're using the barrier in and of itself? I think we're all a lot of the same thing.
Can we stop the stop share so that we can see the others?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Tyler Garner. Is there anyone online who had any questions? Looks like maybe they're not on anymore. I just want to say thank you so much. Your presentation was incredible. I'm so excited for all of the work that you're leading here. The city is lucky to have you, and your history and experience and expertise. You just demonstrated all of incredible work that you were doing at the city, and you're really hitting the ground running. And whatever we can do to offer to be a partner or to strengthen relationships. I don't know if you're getting any WIOA funding, you ought to be. So anything like that, we don't have anyone necessarily from DEET, DSD or WIS department here, but that seems like a no-brainer that they should be supporting your efforts. Even currently, DEET just recently, we learned at the last Governor's Workforce Development Board meeting is giving out WIOA Gov Reserve funding for ECE, right? It's the ECE program that's from DEET, not from you. Early childhood education funding, pretty inequitable geographically how that funding is being distributed right now. So perhaps that's an opportunity for the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation to help drive some resources to your project. And then thank you to the committee members. This was a really authentic discussion. We want to bring effort to everything that you're talking about. So please let us know as we continue this, just in between meetings, what that looks like to you. It sounds like conducting a study, identifying the problem, which I think we know what the problem is, but also just looking at how to really reach people, bring resources where they are at the state. That's obviously been a disconnect. That's not new information, probably, right? And just working through some of this. So thank you. Yeah, okay. Moving on to agenda item number 9 for discussion information only. I think we have the feedback from committee members based on the data that David presented on, which I apologize you didn't have those slides printed. We received them pretty last minute, but in the future, I myself would have enjoyed having them printed. I could not read very many of the slides. Is there any other feedback going into the next meeting as we set that agenda and what you'd like to see?
Hi. Will you hear me say this? Evelyn, for the record, Evelyn Thompson-Hilbert. I love the suggestion about the asset map. So my question is, what kind of actions can we move forward with that would be beneficial? I think asset maps are way underutilized and understated. And I don't know as a committee how we could facilitate that or what else your suggestions are, but some of us were talking before this meeting. It's not that there aren't resources. It's the gap. It's the gap. And then the assets already resident within the community, despite what the data shows, there's a lot of, ability in the community. But I don't know what we have to do to move forward with that.
Mike Yoder, for the record. We've talked about asset mapping for a few years now with the Workforce Investment Board, and I can do some research to see if anybody's gotten anywhere and see if we can at least get a starting point, and then fill in the gaps, as you say, or bring it up to date if it hasn't been fully completed, and if it's not up to date. I would be glad to do some research because I've been on a few committees where that was the exact one of the suggestions, that we have to have an asset map, do a gap analysis of previous works that stakeholders have done either in collaboration or individually. And I'm pretty sure there's a asset map that has started out there. We were working on that project 354 before the shutdown. I can check with my connections over Workforce Connections and see if we can get a draft or something that has been started that maybe can continuously put some work into it. So I'll report back on that as soon as possible.
Thank you.
There's my final thought is not just not only for this various underserved populations, but I think as a state across the really understand what the really state of the workforce. What is it? So the study that we're talking about, not just for underserved population, probably should start there, right? Probably should start there, but I think we should stick at that because I believe that I don't believe that the agencies actually know who their clients are and what they're doing. And I think that's the biggest thing that has a problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. All right. I don't believe that there's any additional subcommittee members who joined, so I'm going to move on. Moving to agenda item 10, members of the public are invited for final comments. Any public comment in Las Vegas? Seeing none. Any public comments on the telephone? Seeing none. Any public comments on the Zoom? Okay. Hearing no further comments, to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you.